So the Cold War ends, and everyone's expecting this new era of peace and global unity, right? Well, what if that was totally wrong? What if the future wasn't about shared ideals at all, but about the clash of ancient cultures? Today, we're digging into a really provocative theory that tried to redraw the entire map of global politics.
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 1990s. The Berlin Wall is rubble. The Soviet Union, gone. The entire world order, the one defined by two superpowers facing off for decades, was just wiped clean. The big question on everyone's mind was, what on earth comes next?
And the answer this theory gives, well, it was a real bombshell. It basically said, forget about political ideology, forget about economics. From now on, the main source of conflict, the great divisions among all of us, are going to be cultural.
So, a civilizational order. What does that even mean? Well, the core idea here is that the world is going to start rearranging itself. Not into the old communist versus capitalist blocks, but into these massive cultural supergroups, or as the author calls them, civilizations. And right at the heart of each of these civilizations is a new kind of power player, the core state. You know, this isn't about the USA and the USSR anymore. These core states are described as the new centers of gravity. They're kind of like the suns of their own little solar systems, pulling in countries that are culturally similar and pushing away the ones that are different.
This right here, this comparison really spells out the difference. I mean, think about the Cold War. It was all about superpowers leading these mixed bags of allies, right? The US was allied with Japan, with Turkey, totally different cultures, but they were united by ideology. This new model says, nope, it's all about family now. It's about culture and kinship. Countries are going to stick with nations they see as their own kind.
All right, so that's the theory. But does it actually hold water in the real world? Well, the source material dives into some huge case studies, looking at how major powers were already starting to act like these core states. So let's take a look at the West, Russia, and China. First up, the West. The idea here is that the old free world, that big anti-communist club, is shrinking. It's becoming less about a political idea and more about a shared Western identity. It's a process of figuring out who's really in the club and who's not.
And wow, this map just lays it all out, doesn't it? The argument is that Europe's new border, both politically and economically, isn't just some random line on a map. No, it follows this ancient cultural fault line that for centuries has separated Western Christianity from Orthodoxy and Islam. This, the theory claims, is the real Eastern Wall of the West.
So while the West is kind of defining its borders, what's happening elsewhere? Let's turn to Russia. The text points out that Russia is doing something very similar. It's shifting away from being a global communist superpower and becoming something new, the core state for the Orthodox world, building its own civilizational team.
And here's who the author sees as Russia's inner circle. You've got countries like Belarus, Armenia, and Kazakhstan, places that share deep cultural and historical ties with Russia. They're seen as naturally aligning with Moscow, creating the heartland of this emerging Orthodox bloc.
And then, of course, there's China. The theory here is that China is stepping back into a role it has played for centuries, the undisputed center of a Sinic or Chinese civilization. And this isn't just about military might. It's about creating this massive economic and cultural sphere of influence that just naturally pulls in other Chinese communities and culturally similar nations.
Now this chart is absolutely fascinating. Take a look. Back in the early 90s, where did most of the so-called foreign investment in mainland China come from? Not the US or Europe. It came from other Chinese communities, Hong Kong and Taiwan. The text calls this the bamboo network, and it's this incredibly powerful economic engine all built on shared culture.
So why does that network work so well? Well, this quote from Singapore's legendary leader, Lee Kuan Yew, just nails it. It makes for easy rapport and trust. And trust, he says, is the foundation of all business. That shared culture creates an instant shortcut, a natural bond that gives overseas Chinese a massive leg up when investing back in the mainland.
Okay, so we've seen these big civilizational blocks. But what happens when one of those giant fault lines doesn't run between two countries, but cuts right through a single nation? For this, the source points to one prime and frankly prophetic example: Ukraine.
And to really get what's going on here, we need this key term from the text, a cleft country. It's exactly what it sounds like, a nation that is literally split down the middle, with huge chunks of its population belonging to different civilizations. And for Ukraine, that split is between its Western-oriented side and its Orthodox Russian-oriented side.
And if you ever want to see that divide, just look at this map. It's from the 1994 presidential election in Ukraine, and the line is just jaw-droppingly clear. The western part of the country voted one way, for the nationalist candidate, while the eastern part voted the other, for the pro-Russian one. It's like the country's cultural fault line became a political reality, right there on an electoral map.
So, seeing this deep division, the author laid out 3 possible futures for Ukraine way back in the 90s. 1, a major war with Russia, which they actually thought was unlikely because of the cultural ties. 2, the country just splits apart. Or 3, and this is what they predicted was most likely, it stays united, but it's permanently cleft, constantly torn and being pulled toward Russia. A prediction that, well, looking back from today, is just incredibly powerful to read.
All right, for our last case study, we're looking at a civilization that, according to the source, kind of breaks the mold. It doesn't quite fit the model. We're talking about the Islamic world, which is described as having this incredible sense of shared identity, but, and this is crucial, lacking one single central power to lead it.
So what's the difference? Well, the argument is all about how loyalty is structured. In the West, loyalty tends to peak at the nation-state. People identify strongly as French or Canadian or American. But in the Islamic world, the text suggests that the strongest loyalties are often to your tribe and family on one end, and to the entire global community of believers, the Ummah, on the other. This can create what's called a hollow middle, where the nation-state itself is comparatively weak.
And that lack of a strong center is directly connected to the fact that there's no obvious core state. As you can see in this table, the author goes through all the potential candidates: Indonesia, Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, but argues that every single one of them falls short for one reason or another, whether it's geography, economics, or deep religious divides within Islam itself.
And all of this leads to the author's final, incredibly stark conclusion. The world will be ordered on the basis of civilizations or not at all. It's a really powerful all-or-nothing statement. It's not just presented as a theory, but as the only viable path to any kind of global order.
So that leaves us with this huge, lingering question, doesn't it? If you do look at the world through this civilizational lens, what does it really mean for our future, for how we handle conflict, and for how we might find new ways to cooperate? It's a challenging thought for sure, and definitely one worth thinking about. Thanks for watching.